André Sapir, Senior Fellow with Bruegel. Bruegel have put forward a proposal for a continental partnership. Is this a template for the future, and how would it work?
Well, we start from the viewpoint that, as the British Prime Minister said, Brexit means Brexit. The UK is going to leave the EU. Was not my choice, but the UK is going to leave the EU, and I think the UK is not leaving Europe. The UK geographically, historically, is remaining in Europe, will remain an important partner of the European Union, will remain an important country in Europe. And that is our starting point. What should be the relationship between the EU and the UK? After all, the UK was a member for 40 years. And, how do we keep a close relationship, but that takes account what voters have decided, that they want to leave the political union. They don't necessarily want to leave the economic part of the union. And that's what we try to put forward, a partnership, which is mainly, but not only, an economic partnership between the European countries and the EU. Essentially, it's a partnership built around the single market, but the single market without free mobility of workers that the voters in the UK have rejected. But we don't only want to discuss the economics relationship. We also see that there is a geopolitical dimension in the relationship between the UK and the EU, especially in the context of the changing world. We don't know whether the US will remain highly engaged in Europe in the future, the way it has been in the past. The world is changing with Russia, with China, with India, with Brazil. And our view is that also the UK and the EU would want to cooperate on a number of strategic geopolitical matters. So the word partnership here is really the key. It's a different partnership than what we had so far, but doesn't mean that we don't need a partnership. And we are putting forward a proposal on how to have a partnership, which is a deep partnership, but different from the partnership that we had in the past. The EU would continue to be a political enterprise, and the UK would be a partner, not participating in the political institutions of the EU, but be a partner to some of those decisions.
President Juncker has said that the fourth freedom, the freedom of movement, is inalienable from those other freedoms. The British public were also told this before the referendum. Are other countries likely to go along with this? Poland, for example, that has a very large community living and working in the UK.
So it's clear that in our proposal, this is, in a sense, the most controversial one. We go against what Mr. Juncker has said, the notion that the four freedoms, freedom of movement of goods, of services, of capital, and workers, they need to go hand in hand. We say they do need to go hand in hand for countries that are members of the EU, that free mobility of workers for EU citizens, this is related to EU citizenship, and this is part of a political project which we buy for the countries that are inside the EU, but we notice that the UK voters have rejected that. Now, should we not then have the possibility of free movement of goods, services, and capital because one is rejecting free movement of workers? We say no. That should be considered. Whether that will be a difficulty, yes, it will be difficult. There may be indeed need for compensation. Yes, it may be the case that if the quotas that we envision, the UK probably would give a quota for EU workers, probably smaller than what it's receiving at the moment. So whether there would be a need of compensation for countries like Poland, for countries from Central and Eastern Europe that have been sending workers to the UK and would feel deprived of an economic benefit. And we say, wait a second, the UK is keeping all of its benefits that it had before, but it's depriving us from benefits. We need some compensation. Yes, I think that's probably something that would be part of a negotiation. And the kind of compensation that I could envisage would be on the contribution of the UK to the EU budget. I think that would be inevitable. Those who have said that the UK, in the UK, those who have said that the UK would not participate anymore in the EU budget, if that position were to be adopted by the UK government, then I think it does mean that the partnership is dead. If you are serious about keeping a close economic relationship between the EU and the UK, necessarily, in our view, that would involve some contribution of the UK to the EU budget.
On Wednesday, Prime Minister Theresa May will be taking her team to Chequers, and no doubt one of the top items on that agenda will be what is going to happen next. We've already seen a few pigeons come home to roost about what exactly will Brexit mean. People don't know. What would you advise Theresa May, Prime Minister, to say to her team?
Okay, I think the spirit that we tried to give in the paper is what I would advise her to do, and I think probably she's inclined to do that, is stay away from all the froth that there was in the UK before the referendum and immediately after the referendum. Now, take a strategic view of this. The UK and the EU are neighbors for the long haul. This is not just about this year, about next year. This is for the next 1,000 years, right? We will be neighbors. And think of the relationship. Don't damage the relationship with the EU from a strategic viewpoint. And strategic viewpoint means both the economics and also the security. I think the UK has a lot to contribute to peace and economic welfare in Europe, and vice versa. And I think you need to have a grown-up discussion. Forget about what are the angers, what are the hopes that have come with the referendum. Think really of the longer term. Where is it that the UK in 50 years' time wants to be in its relationship with the EU, given where the world is going? I think that's the key element. And then from there, deduce what should be your strategy into negotiating with the EU. But first, sort of get a number of basic principles. And those basic principles, we believe, should be principles based on the big picture. The big picture of the relationship with the EU and the big picture of the place of the UK and Europe in the world.